guys? Joe Szymanski here. How do you like that, Mason Nation? Another big win for your Patriots today. Student section absolutely showed out. Go Green and Gold. Ladies and gentlemen, it might be the off season, but we are back. Welcome to the Onward to Victory podcast. It's finally a little different format. You've got me. I'm Joe Szymanski. But with me here is my colleague, my friend, and our usual writer on GiantKiller.co, Palmer Johnson. Palmer, it's been an offseason, hasn't it?
Sure has.
Sure has. So we're going to start out here. We're going to start with the departures, and we're kind of go through like the expected departures, the players who we kind of expected to leave, whether that was because they were graduating or these were players that we kind of expected to enter the transfer portal even when the season started. And then we'll talk about maybe the guys that we didn't necessarily expect to enter the portal and leave this year. But I think to start it off, obviously, in terms of losses to the Patriots, Palmer, there were two ones that we knew about right away, and that was Amari Kelly and Trey Wood. They were both fifth-year seniors using their COVID year. Trey Wood, the third point guard, maybe, had a game or two here. The Davidson game away comes to mind where he really played a big role in us winning that one. But I think I want to put us over to you here. Amari Kelly, obviously, I think when he was brought in, was someone who we kind of looked at as this guy's going to be a defensive stopper. He's never averaged more than 10 points a game anywhere. But it seemed like he was kind of unlocked this year by Tony's skin in this offense. So, Palmer, kind of give me what you thought Amari Kelly did this year and how he was kind of able to affect the way the season went.
Well, he really, it was clear that he was the best defensive player on the team overall. And then him having, it seemed like his previous schools just didn't believe that big men should shoot threes ever, which is just like, okay. But there'd be games where it's just like he would quietly shoot like 7 for 9. Like in the game, like it didn't sound like he did that well, but then he had, 15 and 11. It's like, oh, that was a really, I remember the opening game. It was like he had like 17 and whatever. And it's kind of like, is that the best Mariah Kelly we're going to see all year? And it was like an average Mariah Kelly game.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing. Like I said earlier, this was Amari. Well, we knew he was going to play a part. We knew he was going to start, especially with Jalen Haynes, who we'll get to later, having the questions about eligibility and the rules that we had. It wasn't, and we'll point out, it wasn't just the former 2 transfer rule that was stopping Jalen from playing. There was another rule that was in play that did not make him eligible for this season. But we knew Amari was going to play. But and I think, like I said, we thought that Monmouth game, we thought that first game was going to maybe be his best showing. But like you said, that's not what happened at all. And he really showed, obviously, the 3-point ability that he showed, which nobody expected. Absolutely nobody expected out of him. Not only that really transformed the team, it kind of gave us that little bit of a longer playing stretch ability. It kind of gave him more of a stretch forward feel than anyone expected him to have. But it also seems to have earned him a workout. If you haven't seen it, it's earned him a workout with the Milwaukee Bucks of the NBA pre-draft wise. Obviously, Kelly is not a player we expect to be drafted, but when you're talking about the undrafted free agent, maybe, the G League, if a team like Milwaukee is taking a look at him, that shows there may be some interest. We kind of thought it would only be Europe or bust for Amari, but that shows there might be some interest here in the country for Amari to get his shot at the G League.
At the very least, it's a team that you can watch. It's a summer league team you can watch, which is like, that's how you want, for Mason, a summer league player is awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then we go to Trey Wood. Like I said, he was the third point guard on the team. He was very clearly behind Baraka, Koji, and Ronald Polite in the pecking order. He had his big games, though. Like I said, I think his biggest game there, you point to that Davidson game. We had some guys out. We just had some guys who weren't playing. We had some guys who were just coming back from some injuries. I think that was one of a couple. I think that Darius Maddox had to miss with a thigh injury that he was dealing with. And Trey Wood kind of kept us in the game in that first half. I think put up 9 points in the first half, had his career high, the season high, I think 15, if I remember correctly in that game. But talk about, kind of, what Trey brought to this team off the bench, Palmer, kind of what you thoughts on him as his one season as a Patriot was.
Early on in the year, before Koji was kind of, not to say he wasn't good, but but when he was still like a normal kind of freshman,
Yeah.
uh, Trey Wood was like, whenever Mason played like a press heavy team, they'd say like, well, I guess we're just gonna have a 2 point guard lineup, and we don't trust Koji yet, so let's put Trey Wood in there. And then he just kind of played that third point guard role really well.
Yeah, I mean, he was certainly. I don't want to say he was maybe like the best third point guard on a team ever was. I mean, obviously, you look at some of the larger schools in the country, they're going to have third point guards that could probably start for a lot of Atlantic 10 schools. But I think for an Atlantic 10 school, I think Trey turned out to be a real luxury. In the fact we had
Yeah.
someone who could be a veteran back there. I think, like you said, before we really knew what Baraka was going to be this season for us, he was someone who was there as a veteran, stable holder. And I think I should point out, too, obviously Ronald Polite's injury history up to this season, even during the season, was, I think, a key. And I think credit to Tony Skinn for recognizing that for someone who had not been around the team at all in any capacity really throughout Polite's career here at Mason. Obviously was doing assistant jobs at Ohio State, Maryland, and Seton Hall during those seasons. But recognizing that, while Polite is certainly a good player, he has had issues with staying on the court, and recognizing that there was with Okoje looking like a just a true freshman, and obviously with Devin Dinkins, we'll get to him soon, having issues. There was that recognition to bring in that third point guard, and that was Trey Wood, who was that luxury. And I think we're going to get to Dinkins here. We talk about people that you expect to transfer along the season. You don't really talk about that with someone who was, kind of a very heralded recruit of the prior regime who you're able to get to stay. But I think, and you can chime in on this here, Palmer, but I think you'll agree with me that it seemed very clear from game one when it turned out that he was out with an undisclosed injury that no one really had seen during the season. It seemed like this was going to, and with, again, the acquisitions of Okoje and Trey Wood, this seemed like it was going one direction.
Yeah. Once he didn't play in game one, I realized like once Trey Wood started playing over him, you kind of thought like, yeah, he's not playing.
Yeah, I mean, I want you to kind of go into this here. Obviously, what I knew, Dinkins, he was kind of like, he was the, talented DC kid, played for Gonzaga High School, a school in the DC area that has produced some very good talents in the past throughout college basketball. You know, had what I would call a rough, not terrible, but I would say a rough first season under Kim English. Uh, I think kind of going to that now, he has transferred to Manhattan, which is undergoing that's not, that's not a school that's part of, the upper echelon of the mid-major. I would even go as far as say they are a low major school in college basketball that are undergoing a really massive rebuild right now. Uh, but what could Devin potentially bring to Manhattan if, say a Manhattan Jaspers fan stumbles onto this podcast wanting to learn more about Devin Dinkins? What could he bring to them in terms of his play style?
Well, he was I could be wrong. I think he was like a 36% shooter his freshman year.
That's correct. Yeah.
So like, if you can get that, like at Manhattan, even if he's, 5'10", that's an above average shooter on your team. And also his thing was he was 5'11", but wasn't fast enough to be 5'11". I
Yeah.
think that will change at Man. I think he will be at least fast enough. You know, I
Yeah.
think I think it'll be much better.
Yeah. It's a place where you're talking about if you could rebuild a college basketball career for Devin
Yeah.
Dinkins. It seems to be a place where he could go. But let's talk about two other guys. The duo that will continue to be a duo. Malik Henry, Ronald Polite, part of the departures. Malik Henry was someone who it felt like for the last 3 seasons, we kind of went through this discussion about, will Malik Henry take the next step? Will he get that extended role that we had kind of been talking about. It did kind of look like at the end of not this past season, but the previous season under Kim English, the second season under Kim English, it looked like Henry was maybe Malik was taking those steps to kind of be, to, being the backup big behind Josh, to maybe being someone who could take over more minutes. It looked like he was going in that direction. It just didn't seem to ever consistently translate to minutes. And I know he was a fan favorite. I loved him when he stepped on the court. He almost always brought an energy boost. But there were moments, I think, throughout his career where you're like, man, this guy could start 25 minutes a game. And then there were other moments where you're like, I don't even want to see this guy touch the ball. And I think, you can go in on this, but I think that kind of explains the dual threat throughout his 4 years at George Mason.
Yeah, as you said last year, he had a couple games where it's like, he had like 10 and 8, and you're like getting really excited, but it felt like those were kind of far in between.
Yeah.
He was one of the big pieces of beating Dayton this year, though.
Oh yeah, I mean he was one of the big pieces of beating Dayton the year prior too.
Yeah,
You have to remember that both in that game at Dayton 2 seasons ago, that both Josh Oduro and Jenica Ojiako had fouled out before the end of the game, putting Malik Henry on Deron Holmes for the last 2 minutes of the game. 2 seasons ago, he had a huge impact off the bench this year. Obviously, I would say he did take a role step up. Obviously, the previous season under Kim English, he had kind of been relegated to third big again with the bringing in of Ojiako as the second big man behind Josh a little bit. And what was an attempt by Kim English to bring in more size. But, like I said, there was a lot to love about Malik Henry. An incredible person, an excellent personality in the locker room by all standards. There was a reason that the team had voted him senior captain. There was a reason that happened during the offseason last year. Just a person who, by all means and purposes, was beloved by his team, by his teammates. His coaches liked him. The fan base loved him. I think there are a lot of people who will tell you that they will appreciate the fact that for a kid who came from Longview, Texas, East Texas, not a local kid at all, to be able to stay here through 3 coaching changes, not only the coach who recruited him getting fired, but then the coach who convinced him to stay after that happened, leaving for a different job, and to stay for another season through that to kind of help keep some culture things going for Tony Skinn. There's a lot of impressiveness to that. And, going into our next guy, Ronald Polite, because these two obviously connected very well together as not just teammates, but as friends and as people outside of the game, because they are both going to be UNC Greensboro Spartans for their 5th year. Both have transferred to UNC Greensboro. Both will play there for their 5th season. But really, Palmer, a lot, basically your entire time as a Mason student, you have seen Ronald Polite take different roles. Obviously the one season that his freshman year, we kind of didn't really see him that much because of injury, but really the years you've been here has been kind of this buildup of, Polite's point guard. He could be a really big piece for us. And now he's point guard 1 and he's point guard 1 again. Talk about kind of what you saw from Ronald Polite in his time here, and what you really kind of thought about his time and his development.
well, of course he took that big jump in his junior year.
Mm-hmm.
I think having a Duro, normally you don't want kind of a crowded paint, but a Duro was a different type of, almost like spacing, like the guy whoever is guarding a Duro can't really help over to play when he's driving, because his play would just drop it right to the Duro wide open. And I feel like Kelly was very, very good, but he didn't have that kind of gravity that a Duro had. And I think, yeah, also, Flight was feel like he had lost half a step. And that was like, yeah.
Yeah, it did. I've always felt like his career is more of one of the bigger what ifs of recent Mason history. This was a kid who a local kid, Temple Hills, Maryland, DMV kid, who was brought in. Clearly, I mean, if you saw his first season and the few minutes he was able to get in, was by far and away on that last year of Paulson team, was by far and away the best player at getting to the basket. But he obviously had ankle issues throughout his whole time. But I think like if you look at it history wise, I think the biggest change I think for him was probably when he had that major hip surgery before his sophomore year. If you're a Washington Capitals fan, you'll know about the hip injury that Nick Backstrom sustained, the surgery he had to go through that process. Obviously, he is a lot older than Polite when he went through that process, but Backstrom has never been the same player since. And I think you can probably argue that while Ronald Polite has obviously still been able to play basketball and has been able at times to play at a very high level of it, never really had that same jump that we first saw from him out of high school in his freshman season after he had to go through that hip surgery.
Yeah, he's before my his high school was before my time.
Yeah.
And at some point I looked like, what did Ron Plett look like in high school? And I just think like, Plett's very good, but that is not the same player whatsoever. He was
Yeah.
much more crafty when he got here.
Yeah. And what's that happens again. We liked Ronnie here. He was a huge part of that second year Kim English team taking a step in conference play that we had. He was a big part this year again, leadership wise. But I think he will even admit his final season ended on a bit of a downturn because his role was overtaken by the next person we're going to talk about. And I think the surprise to a lot of Mason fans, I would say regular Mason fans, maybe not some of the people who are maybe a little bit more involved in the inner workings of the program. But I think to a lot of the day-to-day Mason fan base, the regular Mason fan, this is probably the most shocking transfer of the offseason. That was Baraka Okogie entering the transfer portal at what I will also point out was a relatively later date than a lot of these other guys. The guys we're talking about right now all entered within the first week of the portal opening up. Okogie took about 2.5 weeks before officially entering the portal in late April. Early April, excuse me. But Baraka Okogie has transferred up. He is going to now be playing in the AAC for Memphis, obviously a program that has a lot of history, a program that also has had a lot of question marks, if to put that lightly, regarding its stability and the coaching and recruitment style of head coach Penny Hardaway. But, we're only going to get one season of him now. Baraka Okogie looked like a person who I thought could have been first team All A10 next year if he had stayed. But Palmer, I want someone who's a student this year and who's able to go to all those games. I was able to watch on TV, but I wasn't able to go to all those games. Talk about Baraka's growth through the season and just kind of his transition from just energetic freshman to the player that we saw at the end of the year.
So earlier in the season, felt like he got most of his value by just kind of forcing guys to foul him. You would look at the stat sheet and be like, oh, he drew 9 fouls today. That's kind of crazy. But then later in the season, it was like, oh, he was drawing better defenders who weren't going to foul him, and he was still making their shots. Uh, it was crazy, like the jump he took. I mean, I saw him in practice before the season, and I could tell like, oh, he moves a little differently than you expect. But then all of a sudden, like, started making all those contested layups, and it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it's obviously gonna be a loss for Mason. Like, there's no
Yeah.
denying that. I think that it's going to be a loss for George Mason that he is not here.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, but I think if there was obviously maybe the one knock that we had on Baraka was his, and it had its moments during the season where this became clear, was his lack of a 3-point shot. It seemed like that hurt us specifically in the game. Again, I'll point to the stretch of the season where Darius Maddox was dealing with a thigh injury. That seemed to be, I would say, the most prolific part. Or, he struggled with the 3-pointer were most evident, I would say. He's going to develop that. He's going to have to develop that if he's going to want to continue to be a high level player. But yeah, there's no denying though. It's a huge loss. It is a loss in terms of a guy who we knew could put up double digit production in terms of points, which is a guy who we knew we could pass. And I think, you know, you pointed out, I think, an underlooked part of him is that he can draw fouls like no one else. As long as he keeps that speed, he is someone who can just beat everyone and anyone, and he will get people to draw fouls. Do you have a best memory of Baraka? I mean, like I said, it's 1 year, but he did seem like a person who was a special talent. Did you kind of have a memory? It was like, man, maybe this kid is going to really be something for us this year.
I mean, so many of them blend together. Of like Mason, well, there was the stretch of Dayton in the Dayton game where there was like like the 24-2 run.
Yeah.
Pretty sure it was something like he might have gotten like two steals on like it was two steals very close together that both times converted to a Mason dunk or a and one layup, and that was like, oh, this is big time.
Yeah. Yeah. And then let's talk about a walk-on transfer. Cam Johnson. Congratulations to Cam. I know he is transferring to Division II, but we have been told, I believe correctly, that he is on a scholarship of some kind now, which is fantastic news for Cam. Obviously, congratulations to him. He'll be going to Elizabeth City State. Believe that's in North Carolina, I believe somewhere.
Yeah,
I believe that's in Eastern North Carolina. So congratulations to Cam. I think that might even, considering where his home is located in Charles City, I don't think that's actually much of a time differential between there and his home versus Charles City to Mason. I actually don't think the timing wise is much different, and it might actually be an easier drive for Cam, considering the lack of 95 traffic that he would have to go through. Palmer obviously being from the Richmond area, I'm sure coming back up to school very well about the hell that is the 95 pathway through Fredericksburg and Lower Stafford at this point in time.
yeah.
Would not recommend on a busy day. Would not recommend it, I think, for anybody, I would say. Uh, but yeah, Cam Johnson kind of was the story. I would say the feel good story of the year, right? You go into that a little bit more.
Well, so he was a like a practice player for the women's team,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember like last Kim English's second year, somebody like Mason Basketball sent out an email to everybody saying like, please come try out for the last walk-on spot, and I guess he's the one that got it.
Yeah, he
So
was.
yeah,
I remember like, and then like because of like some of the again, we talk about injury issues. Like Polite was down, and so like Cam Johnson suddenly became point guard number 2 during like the VCU game, and he comes out with like no name on the back of his jersey.
oh
And
yeah,
I remember like he didn't play like poorly. It was like, oh, he's kind of like quick. He
you
did
didn't
it,
notice.
there's a reason that Cam was able to enter the transfer portal and was able to get a
Yeah,
scholarship somewhere.
yeah,
There was a reason for that. But to end off this part of it here, there's obviously a name and the situation that developed around it that we've been dancing around here. And obviously, that's the big name, the leading scorer from this past season, Keyshawn Hall, entered the transfer portal, I think, maybe 2 or 3 days after after the portal officially opened and Mason's season ended. And he will be transferring to UCF, which I know if you think about it first time, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but you have to remember that UCF is Big 12 now. He will be playing some of the best college basketball teams in conference play now. He will be playing the Houstons. He'll be playing I was about to say Texas, but that's not the case anymore, which will be very weird to say, but he will be playing some of the best in college basketball this upcoming season at UCF. But like I said, there's this bitter taste that is, I think, in every diehard Mason fan's mouth about the process that it took that ended kind of as, man, we got this potentially, well, from what was the start of like, man, we got this potentially really talented kid from UNLV, to him showing that talent and becoming our best player this season, to what I think everyone would call a very, I think, disappointing and bitter end for his time with the program.
yeah. Uh, you said he entered a couple days after the Mason season ended. I could be wrong. I feel like he stayed for like stayed for like might have been like past the first weekend of the tournament.
That's true. I might be wrong. I think it all kind of bleeds together at some point, to
Yeah.
be honest. But
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah. But go ahead, keep on going.
Uh,
You're right, though, I think.
yeah, I would like to say like when he was not playing at the end, kind of gave us some, Woody Newton appreciation
Yeah.
because he came in and played like, oh, this is a starting caliber player that we're really lucky to have come off the bench.
Yeah, it would certainly seem like Woody's shining moment of the season. Certainly, I think I had always liked Woody Newton. I was glad he was a part of this
Mhm.
team. I think it made the general Mason fans happier that
Yeah.
they had him here because I think he was also a player after he had such a hot start from three, and then he like really cooled down during the first half of conference play and kind of the end of non-con. I think there were a lot of, regular to the day-to-day fans who did not necessarily appreciate the fact that we had a 6'9" forward coming off the bench who could shoot threes. I don't think a lot of people appreciated that enough that we had that option. And I hate the way that it had to happen.
Hmm.
If you're in the know, you will know about the stories that have lingered under the waters that led to this. We're not going to go into that tonight. That's not what the point of this is. We're probably never going to go in detail with that because it doesn't matter anymore because he's gone. He's gone, and he will have his shot again at the Big 12, at UCF in the Big 12, which I know, again, like I said, some people kind of pointed and laughed at. Again, he kind of did the same thing he did last year when he announced his final four teams. I was like, oh, it's George Mason, and then there's like, oh, it's Louisville, Georgetown, and there was someone else, I think.
Was it
I,
Xavier?
what?
Was it Xavier?
It was, yeah, it might have been Xavier, but there was another big
Yeah,
East
it's a big
team, I
school.
think, in there last year when it was like, oh, and then he picked George Mason. But a lot of people knew that VCU was probably a lot closer to getting Keyshawn Hall than than the Louisvilles and the Georgetowns ever were really interested in him.
Yeah.
And he kind of played the same way again with, I think he ended up with like Arkansas, excuse me, Arkansas, USC, Michigan State, who then came out, which I think was probably the funniest thing I've seen in the portal all offseason, that a team
Yeah.
came out and said like, we're we're not playing ball for this guy right now, which I think was very funny. I don't think the team came out and say, but like multiple team reporters came out and be like, yeah, this guy, we don't know what this guy's talking about.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
but so I know a lot of people made fun of that, but Hall still does take this big step up. He will have a big role on a Big 12 team in UCF that is trying to gain a step. This is a team that is trying to play for an NCAA tournament. So he is taking that step up. So it'll be very interesting to me to see where he goes with that. But now let's get to the more exciting parts. Let's get to the more exciting parts here. We will have, let's kick it off here with Giovanni Emigiru from Siena, the first name who kind of came out for George Mason and became the first name that really kind of became known to Mason Nation was this big center from Siena, again, kind of similar to Kim English's second season. There was a lot of play that George Mason needs to. Amari Kelly's leaving, Malik Henry's leaving. Mason needs to add maybe some proven size to the far starting five position. I think they've got that in Majiro.
Mhm.
And
He he is a he is very big. I'm not sure where in the lineup he fits. It's somewhere high. Whether it's what they put Haynes at 4 or 5. Either way, you're getting a quality big man who can play really good post defense, which is something that Mason was kind of lacking last year.
yeah,
Other than the, yeah,
yeah, and to keep it on here. You were kind of the guy. If you've read any of the Giant Killer transfer player in scouting articles. That's all Palmer. That's all his doing, folks. So you kind of got a deep look at a guy like Emigiru. So talk to me about You said the post defense already. This is a guy who's 6'11", and that means he's going to have a big wingspan. The question though, coming from Stiana though, will always be: can he defend against the some of the elite quality that bigs that we will have in the A10 this year? What do you think about him, and where do you think he can take up the step for us?
So I couldn't find the ESPN Plus had like already kind of disappeared by then. The VODs had kind of disappeared by then. But when he played against three A10 teams, which all three had really good, centers. He played UMass, St. Bonaventure, and Yale Quinn.
Mm.
Uh, Josh Cohen had five, and Yale Quinn had nine on eight shots. Now Venning had 20 on 8 for 12. I'll take 2 out of 3 there. I will take 2 out of 3.
Yeah, you'll take 2 out of 3, and like you said, this isn't necessarily he's not necessarily the guy that we're expecting to start this season, at least not at the moment, like you said. And we're gonna get into this guy here. This is an addition that's not technically an addition, but it is an addition this year. Uh, but Haynes is there's been talk. He slimmed down a little bit since he's come to Mason. They seem to be trying to develop a 3-point shot at Mason. So, Palmer, I'm going to ask you, is Jalen Haynes a 4, or are we going to see him at the 5 like we all expected him to be when we got him here?
So I think he was a 4 until Zach Anderson showed up. But so I watched a game of his from 2022, 2023,
Mhm.
and they used him like a 4. Like he had some moments where he posted up right into the basket, but he felt almost like a wing sometimes, where it's like I could definitely see him playing the 4, especially if he slimmed down. I think they can do kind of whatever they want with him, and it'll work.
Yeah, he does. He is kind of the X factor for this upcoming season. It's hard. It's very hard to declare an X factor before you kind of see the first couple of practices of the season. But I think not just in the Mason fan base, but I think across the A10, if you follow this stuff closely, there is probably a very strong agreement that if there is an X factor to George Mason's season, it feels like that Jalen Haynes is probably that guy. I think you would probably say in that kind of mindset thing there. It would probably be that Jalen Haynes is probably that guy uh, to take that point there. He seems to be the guy who would be, he would be the dude. He would be the guy to be the X factor and it kind of be like he could make or break the season. We don't really know yet.
Yeah, he's a big, uh, he's a very, very, very big wild card. But I think the big kind of saving grace for anybody who has his doubt has their doubts. Steve Kerr is the big man coach, and he, including Amari Kelly, has a history of having big men break out in their first year under him. So whatever weaknesses we saw at East Tennessee State, they could be gone. We just don't know. It could be great.
Yeah, it could really work for this group. It could really work for this team. And like you said, and it's very nice to have Steve Curran back. I'm not going to delve in this very far, but he was a guy whose name was thrown around a couple of potentially open coaching positions this past year. That was kind of the name that we were talking about there. We know, I think specifically, I think with I believe it was Canisius who had fired their head coach this past year. Curran was reportedly a finalist for that. He will be back though. He will be coaching our big men, and I think that's very, very exciting for this team here. But you already mentioned we talked about Haynes at the 4, but maybe he's not at the 4 because we got this guy. And this is a guy who I think is maybe one of, I think, 2 who you could argue is Mason's most exciting transfer this season. Palmer, talk to me about Zach Anderson, the 6'7" wing from FGCU. Talk to me about him and tell Mason Nation why you need to be excited for this guy.
So he has a chance to just kind of felt like Mason had kind of shooting problems last year. He shot, I think, 46% from three, which is just unreal. Like and it wasn't a one-off thing because he kind of like it was a slow, it wasn't like he went from 33 to 46. It was a slow progression to all of a sudden like this guy is scoring a lot of points very efficiently. There was a stat that on catch and shoot shots, which are mostly threes for him, uh, he was in the 99th percentile
Ooh.
in terms of points per shot, which I don't care if it's the A Sun. 99th percentile is crazy. Like that's crazy on the volume he was getting to. He's a
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about a guy who could. You mentioned the shooting prompts. Like, I think most of Mason Nation would agree. There was one glaring, clear issue that this team had last year is that the shooting from three went cold too often, especially if Darius Maddox was not available or if he was not on during the game. Obviously, Amari Kelly was a lovely surprise, but he
Mhm.
was not a guy who was. Let's not pretend he was a guy shooting a lot of threes. He shot way more threes than he would shot ever in his career. He shot over 50 threes. He shot over 40% from those threes, but he only shot like 52 of them throughout a year. You obviously had some struggles. You had guys like Polite step back, which, kind of take a step back. Keyshawn Hall, great inside player, only shot around 32% from three, though. Jared Billups had his offensive struggles. So you look at that, magically even guy. Woody Newton was maybe thought to be a guy off the bench, started off really hot, cooled down. Baraka Koju, we kind of went through that already. Didn't really have a 3-point shot. Trey Wood didn't really have a 3-point shot to speak of. Zach Anderson, it seems like finally gives the answer. Okay, who's going to be Mason's second 3-point shooter in the starting lineup?
Yeah.
It feels like Zach Anderson answers that question for all of us here. Now let's talk about what will probably be George Mason's second most exciting transfer of the offseason, or maybe to some people, the most exciting. Let's talk about KD Johnson, this 6-foot combo guard, fifth-year grad transfer student from Auburn. And you don't hear a lot of George Mason players coming down from Auburn to transfer down to us. And there's a big reason why, Palmer. Palmer, tell us why not only is Tony Skinner going to be taking a chance on KD Johnson, tell us why he's specifically going to be coming to George Mason.
So we think they're going to try him at point guard, which I mean, it makes sense. He could not do that in the SEC. You can't try a different position in the SEC, as a fifth year. Uh, so coming down here, that makes sense. And the spot is pretty open. With the coach leaving, it's pretty open.
Yeah, that seems to be like the big key in all of this. It seems like he started to become more of a player when it was became clear that Okogie was leaving, that he was transferring out of here, and that there was no chance for him to come back. It seemed to be the moment where KD Johnson, who certainly, if you watch the social media reaction to
Mhm.
his announcement, certainly seemed to bring a few fans from a couple of SEC schools out of their woodworks to trash KD Johnson for transferring down. I know for a fact he's going to prove them all wrong this season when he shows how good he is at George Mason this season. But KD Johnson is going to be. I don't want to use the word crazy because I don't want to. I think that has negative connotations to that. But he is going to be an incredibly electric player. I think in terms not only his style of play, but I think the attitude that he brings to the team. That seems to be what I don't know what you've seen. Like I said, you're the scouting guy. You've seen these guys play more. But for KD, it seems like in all his highlight reels, he is yelling at somebody after he makes
Yeah.
a shot. So tell me what you saw when scouting him. Tell me about kind of his ability here to kind of to just bring 100% to every possession.
So there was when I was scouting him against St. Bonaventure, there was a play where I'm not sure, if I remember, I don't think he either didn't have the ball or he threw an alley oop. Basically, like somebody on his team like caught an alley oop and he dunked it, and you could hear him screaming through the like whatever mic was close by. You could hear him screaming, and then like chest bump somebody into the second row, like after St. Bonaventure called timeout. It's like, okay, this guy is going to be crazy energy, and crazy energy in a good way.
And to be fair, that does seem like maybe if there was another aspect that Mason was missing, it was that guy who would, and we kind of talked about this during the Kim English era too a little bit. There were certainly leaders in our locker room, but maybe not necessarily the guy who was going to yell and scream and really kind of get guys going on the court. KD Johnson is going to change that. Let's just say he is going to change that in a very big way. He's someone who I'm personally very excited for. He's a guy who I think replaces Baraka's ability to drive through the hoop at the one spot. Again, maybe not the guy who has the most developed 3-point shot, but that might not be as big a concern right now because we talk about Zach Anderson, the second shooter. But Mason might have found the third shooter in that starting lineup too. Let's talk about Braden O'Connor. He was the second transfer to announce his coming to Mason of the season, the second pickup of the offseason from the transfer portal. Very interesting player. 2 years left on after 2 years at UMass Lowell, the real flagship university of the state of Massachusetts. Let's get that right. For all those UMass Amherst folks out there, UMass Lowell is the real flagship of the state. But to talk about it here, though, Braden O'Connor, he would be a 2. I think there will probably be one of the bigger conversations in the offseason that will be had will be, is Braden O'Connor going to take Jared Billups' starting role at the shooting guard spot? That will probably be one of the bigger conversations that as we get closer to summertime practices and kind of that build up into the season, that might be one of the two big discussions we have about this team. Away, I think the starting 5 position, where does Haynes fit? And I think probably number 2, maybe even number 1 will be who is the starting shooting guard. Jared Billups, obviously huge production on the defensive side of the ball. We all know that. The question, as it was when he was brought in, where is his offensive game? He is an excellent defensive player. If Amari Kelly was the best defensive player on the team last year, Jared Billups was a pretty close second. He was given some very, very tough minutes at certain points of the season. One of the biggest games that I think you would say was probably the Richmond game at home at the end of the season, where he completely shut down Jordan King, who was probably a lot of people's second place to Deron Holmes for A10 Player of the Year last year.
He won Coke Player of the Year.
That's true. That's right. I forgot the people did the stupid thing there and he won Coke Player of the Year.
Yeah.
But, my opinion, Deron Holmes, I thought was the unequivocal. But, such aside here, Jared Billups defended a guy who, if you didn't have him as your player of the year, he was second place for player of the year by a lot of the fan bases in the A10. And he shut him down really well, and he shut down a lot of very talented guards. But Palmer, do you think Braden O'Connor's offensive ability, and I will point this out again, his ability to shoot threes, which really seemed to develop late in the season for UMass Lowell and was a huge part of them getting to the American East Finals, is that one to get a third shooter out there? Will that overtake maybe the one to have especially with KD Johnson now potentially looking like the starting point guard? Does that maybe convince Tony Skinn to be like, we're going to put Braden out here for more minutes and we're going to put Jared out there?
I think it depends on who wins the starting point guard job between Johnson and Quigley. I think that Billups and Johnson kind of overlap just a little too much. Kind of like, might not need 2 of those guys out there. But O'Connor, I think he shot 48% of 3 in conference play.
Mm-hmm.
And it was on something, like 32 or, it was on a big.
It was not a small number. It wasn't like he shot 48% on only 30 shots or something like that. This is a guy who in conference play was taking, I think, took over 63s, I think, when we're talking
it might have been 28 to 60.
Yeah.
It might have been 28 to 60. I did notice that when I watched him, he was like kind of playing point guard for UMSL at some points. So he'll ever play point guard for me because they have guys, but if that kind of makes you feel better about like press teams. Like that's another guy who can handle the ball and you don't really feel bad about it.
Yeah. And if there again, I think I love Jared Billups. He's probably my favorite glue guy, hard-nosed guy that in my time as a Mason fan that we've had here. Definitely the best of those guys, I would say, in terms of just raw ability. Maybe I think the best defensive guard that Mason's maybe seen in a decade. I think you can argue since probably since the Larranaga years that you could argue has played at the guard role and who can, I think this was always kind of an issue in I think the English era teams is that we didn't really have a guard who could stand on another team's best guard to defend. That was always kind of an issue that we had because Devon Cooper was a solid 3-point shooter, struggled on the defensive end of the ball. Xavier Johnson came English his first year, struggled on the defensive end of the ball. Ronnie Polite struggled to stay healthy sometimes. It wasn't always great on the defensive side of the ball. But Jared Billups can defend a guard. Like I said, he can defend guards. The question will be, I think, can he develop a more consistent? I don't know if he's ever going to develop a consistent three ball. I think we're too far through in his career maybe to say that happening. But I think we forget Jared Billups is 6'4". Like he can drive the hoop. He has the size and the ability to drive the hoop. He just needs to do it consistently. And I want him to do it consistently. Don't get me wrong. I want him to do it consistently. But I think the battle between him and O'Connor is going to be with again I think like you said, if KD Johnson wins that if he wins that starting point guard spot, do you trust the offensive ability in that backcourt if he and Billups are out there at the same time? Because I think you're right. Does that make the offensive workload too heavy on what we expect to be a front three of Maddox, Anderson, and Haynes? Does that put too much pressure on them to create the offense and not enough on the back end of things? I think you're right, and I think that's where the question's going to be. And as you point out, though, Johnson does have to beat out, and this is maybe the most interesting transfer I think we've got from Mason this year because we lost a guy who had 3 years left from point guard who was exciting young freshman, made the all freshman team, had some very good moments. We lost that guy and he bounced up. We also then proceeded to take a guy from a lower level conference who I believe was an all freshman team player.
Yes.
Plays the point guard, can kind of maybe not necessarily as a drivable guy, but seems to have a more consistent outside shot than a Koji. Let's talk about Jeremiah. Excuse me. Let's talk about Jeremiah Quigley because maybe they're. Excuse me. Really, wow. Let's talk about Jeremiah Quigley because this is a guy who, like I said, probably the most interesting transfer of the bunch that we've gotten this year. So I want you to talk about Jeremiah Quigley a little bit here.
So this guy, I was not going to say disappointed when I looked at his stat sheet. Just seeing like, oh, a freshman, like 11 points, 41% from the field, 33 from three. Like, oh, this is just one of those guys. One of those. There's so many of these guys, and then I watch his game against Siena. It's like, oh, this guy's crazy. He is crazy on defensive ends. Uh, I mean, uh, he had a. I was game against Siena, who was not a very good basketball team,
No.
but they are still Division One with basketball players.
And don't forget I believe that's a conference opponent too.
Yes, it was a conference play.
That's so that also let's point out that's all there's always a difference there between in every conference between playing non-conference games
Yeah,
versus these in-conference games.
but he has Tobin Anderson as his head coach at Iona, who is the Farley Dickinson coach who took down Purdue. So they were running press, and it just absolutely ruined Siena's day. And I think on their first 7 possessions of running the press, or it was first 9 of possessions of running the press, Quigley made a play that like that ruined their offense on 7 of them. He had like a deflection, forced him to throw it out of bounds 3 times. Basically, like he was wrecking Sienna's whole game plan by himself, and that is just what you want to see in a Tony Skin point guard. He might not score crazily, but he's going to play really good defense. I'm happy. He was the guy I'm most excited about this offseason compared to what the expectations are for him.
Yeah, and I think you have to consider, obviously, with the unlimited the former 2-time transfer rule kind of dead in the water now. Got to question how much this matters, but there is some idea of consistency potentially with Quigley. Like I pointed out, the COVID years are for now. They are for now dead for anyone who was not, for players like Quigley who have come up later in terms here. Those years, he does not have a fifth year. Let's make that very clear. Those are dead for now for new players. There are obviously lawsuits in certain courts that are trying to just make fifth years a thing. But the idea of Quigley having these 3 years left, he's got 3 seasons left. If KD Johnson, even if he wins the starting spot, he's gone. And this is KD Johnson's 5th year. No matter what happens this year, when this year's up, his college eligibility is done. KD Johnson's college career is over. That makes Quigley, I think, this real. I mean, because we have to remember what I think to kind of circle into this next guy we're going to talk about, because we're done with the transfers. Let's talk about the freshman. Quigley's got 3 years left. And there's another point guard of kind of similar size. Let's talk about Justin Begg. Obviously, Mason they have 2 freshman recruits coming in. They have Justin Begg, the point guard out of Houston, Texas. We know there have been some concerns from the Mason fan base that he may try and get out of his signing because Mike Econom has left. I believe we've been told to quell those worries, I believe. And that for what we've been told, he will play freshman ball. This is kind of like how we were told to quell the worries on Austin Ball last year. Same idea with Justin Begg. He will be a George Mason Patriot next season. And I, for one, am very excited for it. Because we've talked, we kind of hinted about Dinkins, undersized guard. Begg is also an undersized guard. And we kind of hit Dinkins on, he's just not quick enough to be at this level to be an undersized guard. If you've watched highlights of Justin Begg, I don't think you'll have those same problems or those same worries. Because this is a guy who can dunk at 5'11". This is a guy who can not just dunk, but Palmer, he can really get up there.
There's times where it's like you kind of got to watch, like, is his head at the rim? It's not there, but it's not far. It's not far.
Yeah. If there's one thing to talk about Justin Begg, and I think because there will be comparisons from part of the fan base to Dinkins, there will be that for Quigley too, was also an undersized guard, also only 5'11". There will be comparisons to Dinkins. Like, last time we brought in an excitable, young, undersized guard, it didn't really work out that well. Is the size difference in the A10 too much now? But these are 2 very different players in terms of speed of the game. And I think, like I said, if Justin Begg gets minutes, they might, again, with Johnson and Quigley, they might not be very hefty, but if he gets minutes, I think he will be able to play up to the pace of the game. I think importantly, and I think you would agree too, Palmer. That seems to be the most important part with any undersized player. Can they play up to the speed of the game that is required at a strong mid-major level like George Mason is at with the Atlantic 10? That's the question. Can he play up to the speed? I think he can. What do you think?
So I watched his like a high school game from him that was this past season, the other day. He just kind of has the extra gear, like he's moving one step faster than everybody else. And what it does a lot is, he gets this guy on the perimeter and he's going to beat him in a race to the rim. So 3 people collapse in on him, and he's really good at passing to the open man. Really good at that, which is really exciting. Like, because he's at Peach Jam, He was really good. He was really good at scoring at Peach Jam. He lit up the score. He lit up the stat sheet at Peach Jam last summer. Uh, and then I watched this game, and he didn't wow me with the scoring, but the passing was just you know it's going to be there. Like scoring sometimes doesn't translate between high school and uh, college. I think the passing will, and that's like a solid floor. Like at the very least, he's going to be a very good passer.
Yeah, and that's what you had to hope for too. I think the Tony Skin offense, especially, I think you compare the first season of Tony Skin versus the first two of Kim English. It very much felt like the Kim English system was missing a consistent, like not just scoring point guard, but I mean like a point guard who was going to lead your team in scoring. You know,
Mhm.
well, I think the Tony Skin offense, you need scoring from your guards, and you want a double digit scorer out of your guards, but I don't think you're expecting one of the wings to be the leading scorer. You're not necessarily like the system is set up for a wing to be a leading scorer. It is not necessarily set up for a point guard to be the leading scorer, if that makes sense. The point guard is certainly, I would say, more traditional. He's expected to also facilitate. We have to remember with Baraka Okogie too, he had a lot of great offensive moments scoring wise, but he led this team in assists per game. And you got to remember with Okogie, he was consistently generating 3, 4, 5 assists a game, especially as he got later on and he was getting more consistent minutes. He was the guy who's, if we were getting assists on plays, more than likely they were coming from passing Baraka. So I think you mentioned, like you said, the passing ability of Beg, something that I think we all expect to translate well, because that's an IQ thing. That is something that if you have it, then you have it. That's not something that you're gonna lose just because you get to college. If you have that IQ to be understanding where the play works and where the pass will work from that position, he has that, and that's what makes me so excited about Justin Beck. Like you said, he seems to be a very high IQ basketball player, and I will always want more of those players on my team. I will always take a high IQ guy who might not get to 20 points per game score over a guy who might be able to be a 20 points per game score, but will make some of the dumbest mistakes that you will ever see on a basketball court in your life.
Yeah.
But there is one more freshman, and I feel very bad for this kid because I don't feel like Mason Nation's talked about this kid enough. Let's talk about Bryson Coakley. 6'5", wing, translates to a small forward, it looks like, uh, in this league. We forget this was a kid who had an early acceptance from Wake Forest. Which is, by the way, Wake Forest had a very good season this past year and is still an ACC school. Wake Forest has history in college basketball. If you want to talk about why they're an ACC school, it's a lot more because of basketball, more than football in their history if you look back. Uh Obviously he decommitted from there. I believe that's partially because there was the coaching change before this season, or there was a change in assist. I don't know if it was, hey, I believe there was something went on. His offer is no longer there. Tony Skin's he's saying, look, this is our guy here. Bryson Coakley is here to play here, and it's going to be very interesting to see what I think he's going to do here. Because you kind of look at the team, if there was one place where you thought you kind of need another young player, probably was the team's wing depth, especially with Zach Anderson and Darius Maddox looking to be the big names.
Yeah, the thing that got me most excited about Coakley, besides the obviously Wake Forest commit, that's a big upside thing. Uh, they took him they took him really early.
Mm-hmm.
Like they didn't need to take Bryson Coakley. Like he was I'm gonna say November, probably before it was they had time to get somebody else if they wanted to,
Yeah.
and they got him.
Yeah, and you're right. And we should have to consider that when it comes to talking about the recruiting process. Bryson Coakley was someone, like you said, I think he signed maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the season kicked off. But you're right. He probably was a guy that if Mason wanted to step back and see, maybe if we have other options, they could have, you're probably right. They probably could have waited on Bryson Coakley a little bit and potentially take a swing somewhere else again, because it was kind of agreed that the positions that we were looking to build youth at were going to be at the wing position and at the guard position at some point. Justin Begg was the guard. Coakley's the wing. We were looking at a lot of wings. There were a lot of wings. If you were following who Mason was targeting, there were a lot of wings that Mason was looking at. So I agree with you. It should give Mason fans a lot of confidence that they went and said Bryson Coakley is our wing. Bryson Coakley is the freshman wing we're going to look at. This is a guy who in high school has shown ability to score at all three levels. He's a little bit more of a three-point guy, which I know will draw some eyebrows maybe because Austin Ball's here. He's a three-point guy, though he didn't always show that. I want to point that out about Austin Ball. He showed a lot of ability to drive to the rim that I think was maybe other than Amari Kelly's offensive boom, was like maybe the second most surprising thing about a Mason player last year was that Austin Ball, for a guy who was just very sold to us, I think, by the former regime, as someone who was just going to sit in the corner and shoot for them, showed an ability and also a drive to get to the basket that we didn't see from him, and I'm really hoping that develops. But Coakley is someone who, again, has shown the ability in high school to score at all three levels, and I'm excited for him to come in and show his stuff. But I think probably if we're talking about minutes for freshmen, he is probably the one who, just because of the talent that's there at the wings, again, you've got Zach Anderson, you've got Darius Maddox, you've got Austin Ball, probably won't see as much time as maybe Begg could potentially see.
Yeah, I mean, so I feel like he has a similar career trajectory as what O'Connor could be.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that just kind of takes up his, I think him sitting behind O'Connor would be very good for his development.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that O'Connor being there just kind of takes up what his role could be for this year.
I think you're right about that. But we're counting up the scholarships, Palmer. We're counting up the guys who are returning. Darius Maddox is coming back. Woody Newton is coming back. Austin Ball, he's coming back. I'm very excited that Austin Ball is coming back. I actually thought at the beginning of last season that if there was someone who was going to potentially be one and done as the freshman, I thought it was going to be Austin Ball since he was not a commit to the staff, but the staff very clearly likes Ball, and he very clearly likes it here. So I'm very excited to have Austin Ball back. I think other than KD Johnson, whether, what his ability at the point guard will be, probably in the other X factor will be what does Austin Ball role look like. But I think we're going to talk about that more as we get closer to the start of the season. But there's one more spot left, Paul. There's one more spot left scholarship-wise for this team. Talk about what this coaching staff is looking for. Obviously, there was a tweet by Steve Curran a couple weeks ago that might give us an insight into what they're looking for that last scholarship role. So you go ahead and tell the fan base what this coaching staff is looking for to fill with that last role.
So as you said, there was a tweet a couple weeks ago where Steve Curran was out in, I believe, LA visiting Utah Tech forward Larry Olenko, which if you look at his stats, you might not really be that impressed. But the thing is, they visited him. He was a JUCO guy as a freshman and spent his sophomore year at Utah Tech. He visited Mason after his JUCO year. So whatever they saw in his JUCO year, it clearly translated to Utah Tech. And that gets me really excited. Like, oh, these guys wanted him back-to-back years. That's like, and if you look at the two possible centers that Mason has, Haynes and Emajuru, they both kind of foul a lot. I think a third, guy who can play the five is really important because I think Haynes and I think they add up to their fouls for 40 minutes. It adds up to almost 10.
Oh, that would be a problem. You could see how that could be a problem.
I know for sure the average, if they both played, it adds up to more than 4 each, which is not good. So you really want a third guy there. And I like Woody Newton. I'm a big Woody Newton guy. I would rather him not play the five this year.
Yes, I think probably even Woody himself would probably say he would not want to have to play consistent minutes of the five again because that was an emergency situation that we got ourselves into there. that we really, I don't think the staff, nor I think Woody, if he, like I said, in an emergency, great teammate, more than happy to do it. That's not his role. That's not his role with this team. So you're saying that Mason, even if it's not Larry here, Larry Olinkana, Ola Yinka. Sorry, I keep butchering his name. I have it right in front of me, and I'm butchering his name. Larry, if you see this, I'm very sorry I butchered your name there. Very sorry. But even if it's not him, Mason, you would say that Mason is very clearly looking at the end of here for that third big man. You would say that is the clear and obvious target. When we get this final guy announced, you're saying that will be the position that we're going to be looking at here.
When you look at like the depth chart of where guys can play, center is the only one that isn't like 3 or 4 deep.
Yeah.
And it's just like I think it would be a kind of a problem if it was not a guy who could play
And obviously that was the plan last year. You had
Yes.
Amari, you had Malik, you had Nico Pavret. Sadly, Nico was a European, and it seemed very obvious that when it became clear that he was going to be the third option, that he seemed to look at more options in his outside of college, and obviously took that chance to a professional role with a, I believe it was a third division team in Spain, I think, if I'm correct.
Sounds right.
I believe we'll probably be targeting more American prospects, I think, for that third role this year, as to not deal with the international prospects. Obviously, they will have more connections and opportunities to go and play those professional lower division level games. We won't have that problem with an American, I don't think. So that might be the target this year. That's no offense to Nico. That's no offense to, the idea of what they are, but that is just a fact of it. If you're going to be a player with an international background and you're going to end up being the third guy on the depth chart, those guys are going to look for different options every time if they think they can get them. And I think this team, the coaching staff is looking for someone who maybe will not be looking for those opportunities in the coming years here. But yeah, that kind of wraps it up here. But we've got a couple minutes left here, Palmer. So I want you give me a prediction. We haven't started the offseason yet. The school year just finished up. Congratulations on another successful year of college, by the way. Congratulations. I
Thank you.
believe it's can I say this, but I've heard you are going to be back in DC and you might get to see some of our guys
Yeah.
because you are going to be interning with the Kenner League.
Yeah.
I believe this. So congratulations to you, Palmer.
Thank
That's
you.
a really big deal. Congratulations on securing that. And be sure to report back on
Yeah.
what I will be sure some of our players will be playing in the Kenner League this summer. But I want you to give us your prediction. Who do you think our starting five will be? Game one, whoever it may be against. We only know one game so far. I guess technically we know two. We don't know the date for the second one yet. I believe there's a home game against Tulane that needs to be set because that was a home and home that we bought with them last year. Obviously, it was away at Tulane last year. It will be at Eagle Bank Arena this year. And of course, maybe one of the more exciting news of the offseason. We're going to Duke, baby. Mason Nation will probably be very tiny, but will be represented at Cameron Indoor Stadium for the first time since 2006-7 season. It's the 2006-7 season, I believe. So a really great opportunity for the team, of course, there. But for game one, whoever it may be against Palmer, who's your starting five?
I think it's going to end up being Katie Johnson, Brittany Connor, Maddox, Anderson, and then Haynes at 5.
That's what
And
you're
that's
going with.
yeah. And this is gonna be one of those years. Somebody, probably multiple players that are really good are gonna come off the bench. Guys that can start are gonna come off the bench.
So if you would say there was a player who you do not have in your starting five at the moment, who would you say if there was a chance, whether that be through injury or it be through a Ronald Polite, Baraka Cody situation where we just have someone who's like, someone is just that good that we have to play them more. Who would your prediction then be of those, six other guys that you would say, okay, maybe this guy maybe ends up getting more minutes than he would maybe at the end of the season than maybe he would at the beginning of the season?
I think it could be Quigley. I'm the biggest Quigley guy I know. I had a buddy who went to Iona, and he was not happy when Quigley left. Uh, it's he he he's not better than Akoji, and I'm the high guy on him. I could see him having like an Akoji impact where maybe he doesn't start, but he plays a lot of minutes that you wouldn't expect.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That would probably be my pick too. I think there's some intrigue with Woody, you
Hmm.
know, depending on players' health. I think Woody maybe is the first guy off, maybe one of the first guys off the bench this year. I think there's a pretty clear tier list of bench guys where I think I agree with you on the starting five. I think it is going to be the starting five. I think you say Johnson, O'Connor, obviously Darius Maddox, uh, Zach Anderson, and then Jalen Haynes. I think there's like very clearly this like set of four who are going to come off the bench first in some order: Quigley, Billups, Newton, and Emejuru. And then there's going to be the two freshmen and probably that third forward we've been talking about. Uh,
Austin Ball's somewhere in there.
yeah. With an Austin, and then like I said, Austin Ball's minutes will probably be the X factor. What will Ball's minutes look like is again another one of those questions that I think we're going to have to see some summer practices and summer and early fall practice to kind of see where his role is. Because again, is he a guy that you want learn? Don't forget, Ball is 6'7", which is the same height as Anderson is. Is Ball a guy you want learning under Zach Anderson? And then is he the guy there? Is he the guy at the four at the future? I think is going to be the big question about Austin Ball this year. I think is he the guy who you see taking over for Austin Ball for Zach Anderson, excuse me, after this once his time is up after this season. Because remember, Zach Anderson is also a fifth-year transfer. This is it for Zach Anderson. This is a COVID year, I believe. This is it. We get him for this 1 year and then it's done. So that'll be the question, I think. And there'll be a lot more for us to have, but for now, I think our time is done here. We're going to be doing this a little bit more, folks. It won't just be me yelling at your camera anymore for 10 minutes for these now. We're going to be a little bit more of me and Palmer and hopefully a couple other guests too as we get along in the season. But for now, this is Joe Szymanski and Palmer Johnson signing off from Giant Killer. Get excited, folks. Come on. I don't care that it's May. Get excited. Get hyped. Be excited for Mason basketball because I think this is really going to be a team that's going to be one to watch. Thank you, folks, so much for listening. Have a great day, afternoon, night, whenever you may be listening, folks. This is the Onward to Victory podcast, your one-stop shop for George Mason basketball.